Hi, this is Amy Wan at the second LA Meetup for Security Token Academy, and I'm here with Marc Boiron from FisherBroyles. Marc, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So it has been a very eventful week for the security token industry. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of enforcement actions and settlements and statements by the SEC. So shall we get started?
Let's do it.
All right. So first, Ether Delta. Do you want to talk about what happened there and what is the takeaway?
Sure. So as many people probably knew, Ether Delta is a decentralized exchange, or purported to be a decentralized exchange, very importantly. So the first thing to remember is the SEC's order is actually against the founder of Ether Delta, who no longer owned Ether Delta, and was not actually against Ether Delta. The owners of Ether Delta are international owners now. And the SEC brought the action against the founder, the settlement against the founder. And essentially, the SEC pretty much said, you're going to have to disgorge your profits. And it was pretty minimal in terms of the penalty. I can't remember what amount it was, but it was pretty minimal.
$40,000 or something.
$30,000 or $40,000. Given the number of trades that they said happened on Ether Delta, which was in the millions, it seems like a pretty kind of minimal slap on the wrist, which is consistent with the approach that they've taken in the industry. The approach has been, the first time we warn one sector of the industry on something, we won't make a big deal out of it. And this was the first time that they took an action against a decentralized exchange. Now, their view was, we already warned you in the Dow report. We had kind of a little section on exchanges, and so you should have known, and that's why you're getting a little more than just a slap on the wrist. And pretty much, I think from now on, the answer is no more slaps on the wrist. I think that's
so consider yourself warned.
I think that's right. The interesting thing about Ether Delta was the question that everyone had was, if you have a decentralized exchange, are you potentially liable? And it kind of answered that, and it kind of didn't. The reason it kind of did was because Ether Delta purported to be a decentralized exchange. And there's a kind of sentence in there where the SEC kind of says, well, you were the one who actually coded the smart contract. And it was around some other language as well, but that was one thing that kind of stood out. Who was it that actually coded the smart contract? The part that kind of brings a little bit less clarity is the fact that we thought Ether Delta was actually a decentralized exchange, except that the founder had a key to alter a contract at any point in time. And so there was kind of limitations on what he could do, but he could actually alter fees on transactions.
So not
that doesn't sound very decentralized to me.
Interesting. The SEC also released a general statement in conjunction with two settlements / enforcement actions. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about the kind of cease and desist proceedings first. So it's against two companies, AirFox and Paragon. One of them, AirFox, raised, I think, $12 million in kind of your, let's call it the standard 2017 ICO.
Yeah.
Paragon raised, it was interesting, the order said $15 million. At the time, I remember reports being more like $50 million. Either way, Paragon was the one that I think most people remember it because it was all over the place. I mean, you had models there that were, publicizing it. I mean, it was a very well-known ICO, and so it kind of stood out there as one that's kind of good thing to make an example out of. But essentially, you look at what happened, and really it wasn't that big of penalties. So first of all, $250,000 each. Interesting thing is they were both treated identically. Both of them need to file a Form 10. So a Form 10 is essentially, you've got existing securities out there and making a filing to register those securities. And then making an offer, similar to a rescission offer, to repurchase anyone's tokens.
And is that rescission offer only for US investors or all token holders?
Yeah, they didn't actually specify just US investors. And so it's going to be all US, all persons. And the reason I think that's going to be the case is the simple fact that they were US-based. Yeah. They made an offering. I don't even know if you can call it under Reg S or not. I guess that's, well, I guess purportedly they did for certain ones, for certain people. But yeah, they didn't distinguish between people.
So you said that now these two 2017 ICOs, and probably now every 2017 ICO has to now go formally register with the SEC. What does that entail? How much does it cost? Is this a big deal or not?
Yeah, one of the most interesting things there's a couple very interesting things. The first one is you typically, as a remedy in this case, don't tell a issuer to go register their securities, right? Typically you got a rescission offer, you've got some damages, but you don't say go file a Form 10. I think the reason that was necessary in this case is you have securities that simply can't be controlled, right? They're out there, nobody can alter that contract, and so the only option the SEC has to clean it up is to say, okay, well, let's protect people in the future. How do we do that? Proper disclosure. And so let's make them register, and now they need to get kind of disclosure out there, and that's what they're going to do. One of the things that's really interesting for the security token world, actually, is the fact that the SEC said file a Form 10. Well, that is kind of the equivalent to saying file an S1 or file a Form 1A, as in a Reg A Plus offering or a public offering. The SEC presumably now is going to be in a situation where they're going to be forced to actually make effective a registration statement. That's something that they haven't done to date, whether it's an S1 or qualifying a Reg A. And so the question really to me is this going to open the floodgates in terms of now filers going ahead, filing a Form 1A and actually having them qualified, now that you're going to have two utility tokens, not even equity, very complex utility tokens out there trading and having been registered.
All of this is very interesting to me because I feel like it harkens back to, if you look at, SEC actions against fintech in general, like what was it back in the, 10 years ago with Lending Club, right? Marketplace lending. It was Lending Club and what was the other one? It was the two large marketplace lenders at the time, Prosper, who they went ahead, they were selling unregistered securities, and the SEC came back and said, okay, you guys need to shut down your operations, you guys need to register, and I've actually talked to the attorneys who did that back in the day, and it cost them over $1 million to get registered, and the compliance every year it's pretty substantial. So, in terms of, actual fines or being labeled a bad act or anything like that, nothing so severe, but, I feel like going through the registration process, that's going to take a lot of time, money, energy, resources. Like, I see it's probably going to be a very intensive thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, it's not easy. They have the advantage, we'll call it an advantage, of not needing to actually go sell those securities at the same time. They've already done that. It's one of those interesting things because the Paragon CEO actually put out a tweet saying how they're leading the pack in compliance now that they are going to register their securities. It was the most fantastic kind of spin on this as possible. So, but the answer is I think they're not going to have the same expenses they would have had. But yeah, it's not insignificant either.
I also think rescission is very interesting in this context because now the crypto markets are way down as compared to what they were last year, right? And so how do you refund these people? Do you refund them in US dollars, in the same amount of Ether, in the comparable amount of Ether or Bitcoin? So much value has been lost. Like, if these people are going to get back through rescission the original amount of Bitcoin or Ether, then maybe they will. I don't know. So it presents a lot of very interesting questions.
Yeah, no, it does. The SEC lives in the fiat world, right? So the SEC is going to want the same value of fiat transferred. But it is interesting when you look at the transaction documents in connection with ICOs and even STOs now that are taking in BTC or ETH, seeing how the conversion is being dealt with, or if you don't meet your target, your kind of minimum raise, how that reimbursement's going to happen. I know a lot of companies that I've talked to who were making rescission offers because of 2017 or didn't hit minimum kind of raises in the context of STOs, and frankly, I look at their documents, I'm like, it's not really all that clear what you're supposed to be doing. So I think that's something that needs to be paid attention to, just beyond what the SEC is going to say about it.
And so do you have any takeaways from the general SEC statement?
Yeah, I'd say we're at a point now where the SEC's view is, take every sector of the ICO world. So, whether it's issuers, exchanges, funds, they've touched on them all now. And every single time, one of the more interesting things was they went back to the Dow and they said, that was your warning. And now they've essentially said, we've given you guidance on all these areas. And I think at this point, they feel that if people weren't fairly warned already, everyone in the industry is fairly warned as to where they stand.
All right, so prior to the end of the holidays, we are supposed to consider everyone fairly warned. Fantastic. One last question. Now we're starting to see a lot of talk around asset-backed tokens. What is an asset-backed token? Is it a security? Can you enlighten us?
Sure. I think asset-backed token is used, in a broad number of ways. My view is it's simply any single token that is actually backed by a physical asset. Some people use it in the context of what I call equity tokens. I view it differently. I view it backed by a piece of art, a piece of real estate, if the deed is tokenized, not if the real estate is put in a company and that equity is tokenized. Piece of art, something of that nature. To me, it comes back down to looking at the Howey test and how it's sold. So you take a piece of art. You tokenize that piece of art, and you go sell it to 100 people. There's only one reason that 100 people are going to be buying it when you say we're going to tokenize it and we're going to put it on exchanges. And that reason is so that I can sell that token that's going to represent the interest I have in that art without all the fees of having to actually have transferred that art, without all the risks relating to actually damaging the art. But the other way to do it is to tokenize that piece of art and maybe sell it to 5 people. And then tell them that that piece of art, that token, gives them certain rights. A right to go see something in a viewing room, or a right to share that piece of art in certain situations. Like what?
Like a timeshare.
Like a timeshare, but something that actually gives them real use. And so if you actually spin it that way, but don't just spin it and actually do that, then you pretty much have an ERC 721 that people are using for enjoyment and not for investment purposes.
So really, the way most people are thinking about and treating asset-backed tokens today probably is most likely a subset of security tokens, is what I'm hearing.
I think that's exactly right. That's the way I'd put it.
Very interesting. Mark, what do you think right now is the biggest challenge for the security token industry today?
The fact that it grew out of ICOs. What that did was it created unreasonable expectations up front for security tokens, whether it's regarding liquidity, ability to raise capital, or simply an understanding of the non-legal community as to what it actually is. And I think we're starting to come around there where expectations are starting to be dampened a little, and we're realizing we're just selling a security, and so whatever you would have raised.
Rationalized, maybe, not dampened.
That's a fair way of putting it. I like that as well. And so I think that as we go into next year, I think we're going to start seeing a kind of reasonable expectations and some growth that's going to be growth based on the underlying equity or the underlying asset, and not necessarily because there's a token.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Amy Wan with Security Token Academy at the second LA Meetup.